I made this video this morning talking about knowledge and belief, uncertainty and doubt, and these kind of relationships that we strike up with conceptual entities. And one of the things that came up in that, I didn't really intended it to, but one of the things that came up in that was this idea of possession, and how some of the relationships that we have to ideas, or to items of knowledge, or to articles of belief, these kind of things, is in some cases we have the sense of possessing these things, possessing knowledge, particularly owning it. There's a sense in which gaining knowledge is kind of walking up to knowledge, picking it up and holding it close to yourself, and owning it. We do talk about feeling that we have ownership of a certain set of ideas sometimes, and what it puts me in mind of is these ideas put by the educationalist David Perkins, who's a really good writer. Actually, he's really clear in a lot of his writing. But he talks about knowledge. I haven't read any of his stuff, but I've heard one of his presentations, one of his kind of conference talks. And in that he talks about knowledge in terms of being occasionally possessive. And he contrasts it with two other kinds of knowledge, which I don't think I'll have time to talk about in this video. He contrasts it with what he calls performative and proactive knowledge. But one kind of knowledge, he says, is possessive. And for Perkins, that's the kind of knowledge which is not necessarily objective in the scientific or empirical sense, but objective in the sense that it's most like an object. It's most clearly delineated. It's most stable. It's the most well defined. It's the most separate from you, actually, in a sense. The date of a famous battle, perhaps 1066, Battle of Hastings. It's a kind of a fact, and you can walk over to that fact in a book. You can pick it up, and you can own that fact, and you might be able to share it in the way that you can share other possessions. You may be able to pass that fact on in the way that you can sometimes pass facts on and pass knowledge on. So it's knowledge that can be possessed. But the odd thing about possessive knowledge, and the whole idea of possessing knowledge at all, really, is that it kind of requires that knowledge be very separate from you. And I presume it's the same from belief and other kinds of things that you might wish to possess, other conceptual content that you might have a possessive relationship with. Because when you possess something, or when one thing possesses another thing, there's necessarily a distinction between them. It's not a relationship of identity. You don't become the thing you possess, usually. In fact, it's absolutely required that there be that distinction. I suppose the example I'm thinking about that is that relationship that, what's he called? Not Alvin Noe. The guy who wrote Being No One, Thomas Metzinger. What Thomas Metzinger talks about, he's talking about the relationship between the mind and or between the self, really, and the body, and why do we feel what is the relationship of self and body? And what Metzinger says there, it's a kind of a relationship of ownership. We feel as if we possess our body. There is a sense in which we have this mindness relationship. This is my body as opposed to anybody else's body. It's a quite deeply felt sense of ownership and possession. But that deeply felt sense isn't, again, one of identity. We don't typically feel that we are our body. I mean, we might in other circumstances, but certainly in the sense that Metzinger is talking about. It's not that we are our body. We might identify with our body, but that identification is one of ownership and possession, so we possess our bodies in the way that we possess other kinds of conceptual entities like knowledge or beliefs. But they're necessarily at a distance. They're necessarily separate. They start to acquire the properties of objects held at a distance, held up to the light, perhaps held within the reach of the hands and the arms, but certainly not pressed up against the skin in an uncomfortable way, and not kind of merging with the flesh in one of in some kind of weird Vulcan mind meld. There is definitely a detachment, and it's a detachment which permits possession. I think it's very, just to return to Perkins, I think that is very different from his understandings of performative and proactive knowledge, which is perhaps something I'll talk about some other time. But certainly possessive knowledge very much configures it as an object somewhere out there in the detached space of visual awareness, kind of.